All right. Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you're watching from out there in the internet. My name's Kareem Candy, representing the Kareem Candy World Orchestra, and we're doing our weekly interview series. And today we have the tremendous pleasure of having the wonderful saxophonist and composer and producer Cory Weeds with us, who is based out of Vancouver, BC. Cory, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Kareem, great to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm honored.
Of course. It's a pleasure. And there's a lot of things to discuss, and the hour goes fast. And I want to remind all the viewers that, we're going to do this for about 45 minutes and then open things up for questions. So if you have questions for myself or Cory, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll get to them as we can. So, we'll get into it here. So, Cory, how did you start playing music? What kind of piqued your interest and got you started wanting to pursue a life in music?
Yeah, I grew up here in Vancouver. I grew up in a musical household. My dad is an amateur guitar player. And so, I did this things that most kids did, unwillingly did piano lessons. And my dad was trying to teach me about jazz and I could care less. And so, I listened to the exact opposite of what he wanted, which was heavy metal. And I'm taking piano. I never really showed any great degree of talent. But as I got older and a little bit more mature, my taste started to refine a little bit, and all that sort of, all that reinforcement that my dad was giving me with the music finally kind of started to take hold. But I still was coming at it from a different kind of place. I had a cousin who was older than me, who I thought that I really looked up to. And he played saxophone, and so he was kind of hipping me to some more contemporary stuff. I can remember going to a Julian Lennon concert and seeing a saxophone player in a trench coat up in the catwalk, thinking that was like super cool. And, and then I got into David Sanborn, and, I hate to say it, and I this is probably the first time I've ever said this publicly, but I got a little bit into Kenny G because that was, kind of like contemporary. But living with that music was very short-lived, because then all of the stuff my dad was telling me, finally, it's like something just opened up. I was like, oh, I get it now. And it was Wes Montgomery, and because he's a guitar player, Miles Davis. And, I switched my graduating year. I switched schools in my graduating year to a very music-focused school. And that's kind of where it took off. That's where I really started to get into jazz. I went to Capilano University for a few years. Then I got a scholarship to the University of North Texas. So I went down there for a year. Enjoyed it, but didn't really, Texas was tough. It was my first kind of foray away from home. And I was young. I was a bit of a late bloomer, and going to Texas is a bit of an eye-opener. Yeah. Would probably still be an eye-opener. Yeah. But it was an incredible experience. I mean, I made incredible strides when I was down there as a saxophonist. Came home, decided I was going to get my bachelor degree and then go back to North Texas and get my master's degree. But what I quickly realized when I came home is that I really had no interest in teaching. I had no interest in being in the school system in any capacity. It just wasn't what I was meant to do. So I quit school in Vancouver, and I went on the road with a kind of like a pop jam band called People Playing Music. Okay. And that was one of the smartest things I ever did, because I immediately traveled. I hadn't really traveled anywhere other than Disneyland, up to that point. And we toured all across Canada. We toured in the States. We made a music video. We went to Europe. That was really my first recording experience. And my first experience at gigging a lot. Every night. I wasn't making any money, but I didn't care. I mean, but it also opened my ears to all kinds of music. At that point, I was pretty much a jazz snob, and I didn't really pay much attention to James Brown or Stevie Wonder or Maceo Parker. I remember Spearhead, like one of Spearhead's first records. It was like a big eye-opening experience for me, and all this incredible music, and then really getting into like the really good pop music, like whether it be Joni Mitchell or Sting or all of it. So just my world kind of just expanded. And so I toured with that band for about 4 or 5 years. And then I'm sure you're going to want to get into this, so I'll let you ask the questions as we go. But that's essentially, I started doing jazz radio. And so, that's essentially where it sort of musically started for me. And then, a lot of that stuff just kind of petered out, and I became kind of a jazz guy and remain a jazz guy. I mean, I still love all kinds of music. I love blues and I love pop music, and I have kids now, so of course I'm listening to all that crap all the time, and actually kind of digging it, So it's, but yeah, that's how it all kind of got started.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as I ask these questions, each question spurs like 50 more questions. So, and it's funny, I talk to a lot of these other musicians too. And, in a club or just around the scene, like, it's all in passing, because it's like, go to the gig, play the gig, go home. And I never get a chance to really dive in and like get to know people, which is kind of, because I've got 2 kids at home and do a lot of teaching and playing just like you do, it's crazy. So it's always just ships passing the night. So I'm enjoying these, getting to learn quite a bit more. It's
one of the positive things about COVID too. I mean, I'm sort of the same like you. I don't really have time to learn about people because I'm just trying to survive,
Yeah, and it's not a negative thing. It's not that we don't want to. It's just we're raising and providing for families, musicians, which is a ridiculously, insanely hard job to do if anyone's ever familiar with it or done it before.
Yeah, so I've enjoyed doing these things. I've done several of them, and I do my own series for my own radio show. That's been fun because now it's like, okay, well, I have the time now to do it, and I want to do it. It's impactful to get to know people, and it's impactful for cross pollinating of music scenes, and it's important. It's important work. So I'm glad you're doing it, and you see it a lot more. You see a lot more people doing it, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, speaking of music scenes, I want to know, I mean, one, it's as you start getting into a life of music, no matter where you're coming from, you kind of realize, oh man, if you have a parent who's a professional musician, I mean, that's a huge boon to your education, because they kind of know and they can kind of help guide and at least give you ideas and insights into things. So having a father as a guitarist is wonderful. Was he, now you said he kind of was impressing things upon you. I'm assuming he was playing with other musicians. Were there other musicians in his sphere of influence that were kind of around and maybe an influence to you?
Yeah, I mean, let me back up. I mean, my dad wasn't a gigging, working. I mean, he did some gigs, but he wasn't like a working professional musician. He was a printer by trade. But the passion, I mean, he was a passionate guy. So, so some of the people, I remember very young, when I was very young, he used to go every Wednesday night to this saxophone player's house in Vancouver. That was like the one I remember, because we were always with my mom on Wednesday night. Oh, that was Daddy's playing night, so he would go down and play with this guy. And then then as I got older and better, I started going to those sessions, and, and my dad knew some other musicians in town, and he knew some of the other people. So he would introduce me to some people, and so there was just that. There was just this constantly music all the time playing. My dad we would used to take the bus downtown every Saturday, and he'd go to A&A Records and pick something up. I mean, I didn't back then, when it was actually happening, it didn't mean anything to me. It was just like, great, we get to go on the bus, like, cool. But now all these years later, I start to think, and as I'm raising my own kids, everything you do, even though they're not really seeing it right now, in 10 years, it'll come out. I remember those trips with my dad and going down there, and I remember him getting the records. And I remember he would start to buy me records. Of course, I would be in the heavy metal section or the rock section. So all those little things kind of come up. It's like, oh yeah, remember that. Like I said, at the time it's happening, you don't think it's influential at all, but it really was. And just my dad just always loved the music. So he started taking me to gigs, and he said, well, let's go hear this guitar player, Oliver Gannon, down at the Alma Street Cafe. And, we'd go down there, and I think I liked it. I'm not too sure. I can't really remember, but it was cool. My dad and I are quite close. So it was kind of like I got to go out with my dad, and he let me do some things that probably most dads wouldn't let their kids do. And he was very open, and, he took care of me, and he fostered and nurtured my love for the music. So, yeah.
So before you went to North Texas, so when did you start like getting into jazz and playing? I know you said you kind of started with more a little bit David Sanborn, Kenny G, that kind of stuff. Was this during like middle school, high school? When did you start?
Yeah, no, this would have been sort of like, grade 11, grade 12. Okay. When I went to grade 12, I had 2 band teachers. I had one guy that was like a Miles Davis, Paul Desmond freak. He was an alto player. And then I had this other teacher who was actually my baseball coach, who was like a Kenny G, the Rippington, Spyro Gyra. So I was kind of getting it from both ends that way, which was really cool. I mean, now I don't have much use for the contemporary stuff, but you know, it was neat back then. It was really good. So, you know, and that was my first sort of experience with really like learning how to improvise. I mean, this isn't saying anything good, but I about myself. But I mean, I was kind of better than most. I had more training, but I couldn't play. Yeah. It wasn't until I really kind of got to my first year college where it was like, whoa, okay, now I really sort of need to kind of learn. But I had the basics down. You know, I was, you know, I had a really good ear and I had the basics down, and I was taking some private lessons. So when I got to college, you know, I was pretty much ready to go. And it was a small college here in Vancouver, which had a great faculty then and has an incredible faculty now. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find. You could find a faculty with better known musicians, but you'd be hard pressed to find a better trained faculty that they have there now. So, you know, and that's when I just started, you know, like many people that go to college, is meeting friends and starting to play and learning and jamming and having sessions and, you know, doing all that. So that's, I mean, then it just kind of, you know, I got a job at a local record store. So it's like I would just get my check and they would let you have this hold pile. So, you know, I would just take my check and, you know, so my CD collection was going crazy, and it was a really fun time. You know, I'll never forget. We used to be able to take stuff and listen to it. If we didn't like it, they had a shrink wrapper, like right in the. It's funny to say that now because I'm sure every used CD shop has one of those in the back. But back then it was a big deal. Yeah. And so I got some Train records. I got Interstellar Space and some other wacky Train record. And I took it home, and of course I hated it. It was just like I never heard it. So I brought it back and I exchanged it for the Gentle Side of John Coltrane, which was a compilation. Yep. And I can't remember what other one, Lush Life maybe, or no, Soul Train. Yeah. And so I was kind of the laughing stock of the jazz department because I brought that, because they all like the avant-garde stuff. And I was like, you know, and I'm an opinionated guy even now. So back then I was like, this sucks. I can't believe it. You know, give me this. So, but my mind was just being like completely blown by all this crazy music. And it's still to this day, you know, I'm 47 now, and I'm, as you can see from my background, I'm an avid record collector, and I still love the passion of having my mind blown by something I haven't heard, you know? Yeah. And well, also too, I should add, any listeners or people that watch this, particularly if they're into collecting vinyl, you know, you should find Cory on Instagram and follow him, because he's always posting stuff about really slick vinyl finds all the time. You're doing this like once a week, finding stuff and putting things up. It's fun. It's fun. And the internet makes it fun. And COVID has made it fun because you have guys like Jason Parker, who I'm sure you know he's got a site up and selling records, and it's just it's for me it's fun. I don't do it for the collectible. Well, that's not true. I mean, I have some very valuable stuff, but that's not my motivation. You know, my motivation is I love the physicality, and I love the interaction you have when you put a vinyl record on, and I like the whole process. You know, I think it's really cool, and I try to instill that in my kids because it's important. You know, so. So it's fun, you know, I enjoy it. Right on. Well, I want to ask, going back a little bit earlier, because I mean, you're not super old, and there's a lot of wonderful musicians in Vancouver. I'm curious, and that are from Vancouver. When you when you were growing up, folks that you went to school with, are there any notable musicians that you attended school with, or that were around the scene at the time when you were coming up and learning how to play? Yeah, I mean, so I mean. You know, a lot of people have, there are. You know, there's several. So, you know, like somebody like Seamus Blake, for example. And I didn't go to school with Seamus Blake. And Seamus Blake actually has lived, even though he grew up here, he's at the age now where he's lived away from here longer than he actually lived here. Yeah. But he was a big one. I can remember him coming back and giving a clinic at the school. And that was a really big deal. And my generation, I think Seamus is probably only 2 or 3 years older than me, or maybe 4 years older. I mean, he was kind of a prodigy. Yeah. And, you know, if you're my age and going through college, like he was a big deal. Seamus was a very big deal. Brad Turner would be another one, a wonderful multi-instrumentalist. And Brad, again, not that much older, but Brad had left to go finish his master's, and we were sort of just starting our bachelor's. And he came back as a teacher, so he was closer to being a contemporary. and then a teacher. But I mean, he was also supremely talented, and he lives here now and still teaches at Cap and has had a very great career. And many of the people that I went to school with at Cap are working here and teaching back at Cap, and are working. Andre Lachance, Bruno Hubert, great musicians who've just been here forever and carving it out, on the local scene when I don't want to say it'd be easier to go elsewhere, but maybe there would have been more opportunities for them if they left. So we're really lucky here. I feel much the same way about, I was having a conversation with Jason Parker about Seattle. It's not always, the scene is not always like right there in your face, but if you actually do a little research and start talking to people, you start to realize how vibrant these scenes are and how many great musicians there are on these scenes. And so I think Seattle and Vancouver have a lot of parallels. The difference between Seattle and Vancouver, I think, is you guys have a little more access to some of the reinforcements. And by that, I mean like KKNX or whatever it is. KNKX, thank you. Even though I'm sure there's musicians have thoughts about that, but it's still a full-time jazz radio station. You had Jazz Alley, and again, their booking pre-COVID, their booking policy has certainly changed in the last 10 years, and I can't blame them. It's what the market bears, whatever. But you guys have that there, and we've had to fight a little harder for that. I mean, and I'm sure we'll get into the club a little bit. That's kind of where I helped out a bit, but we never had like a Jazz Alley here. But the scenes are quite similar. They're kind of underground. There's a lot of really great shit happening. You just got to search for it a little more than you maybe would in New York, for obvious reasons. I mean, New York is huge, or Chicago, or a bigger city, So the scene here is very strong. It hasn't, I got to say, pre-COVID, it was the most exciting it had been in many years. There were places to play, lots of musician-run cooperatives and other clubs, like kind of moonlighting as jazz clubs on certain nights of the week. And there was Frankie's. It was really happening. And I don't know what to expect when all this madness ends. I hope we can get back to that, but it was a really healthy scene here. So,
Yeah, I definitely, being in the music scene for a long time, I have opinions about this. I think there's never, well, I never say never, but there's a large population of great musicians in this area, and there's a large audience for it, whether people realize it or not. And all the clubs that I grew up playing in have come and gone, and in that time more clubs have come and gone, but there always seems to be clubs popping up and musicians and fans to support it. So I think despite all the stuff that we've had to endure over the past year, and who knows how much longer, I think once things are safe and we're able to get back to playing, I think, things will pop up. In fact, I wanted to ask you about that in terms of the scene and the scene changing in Vancouver. I'm sure you heard recently, we lost Tula's here, which have been around for 20, 25 years. In Tacoma, there was a really well-known club by the name of Red Kelly's. Red Kelly was a bassist that played with Woody Herman and Red Norvo and Frank Sinatra, and he would bring all these wonderful artists to town in Tacoma. And that, it came and gone, they probably closed maybe 10, 15 years ago now. Anyways, what I wanted to ask you was Vancouver, BC, and the time you started playing till now, I'm assuming that the scene has changed quite a bit. And I know with like the growth of new buildings and leases coming and going, how badly impacted has Vancouver's jazz scene been even prior to COVID? Has it been impacted?
Yeah, I mean, it's ebbs and flows. I mean, things come and go. I don't. It'd be interesting, I'm thinking about the question because I at first I think, well, it's a simple answer, and I really do think it is a simple answer. It does ebb and flow. I think the bigger question, like when you live in a big city or a nice city like Vancouver or Seattle or any city for that matter, the buildings are, the population is going to grow, the big box stores are going to come in, the little guys are going to be pushed out. Like that's happening all over the place. I think the bigger issue for jazz and in every scene, whether it's New York or Seattle or Portland or anywhere, Toronto, is how do we nurture it and make the audience younger? Because it's cooking right now, because the generation of people now are buying CDs and they're paying $30 covers and so. But in 20 years, at the risk of sounding morbid, like a lot of those people are not going to be doing that anymore. And we need the people that are 30 and 40 now or 20, kind of pick up that slack. That's the tough part. So, I think jazz has gotten more expensive, since when I first started out. And what happens when it gets more expensive is that it cuts out the young people. Because young people haven't been taught the value of it like I was taught or you were taught. Yeah. So they spend that money on, I don't think the money's not there. I just think that they would rather spend it on their, deluxe vapor or, whatever it is that young kids are into. And, we were talking about vinyl before, like everybody says, oh yeah, vinyl's coming back. It's like, well, okay, it's coming back, but it's just young kids, like, buying digitally pressed copies of Kind of Blue, like, and that's good. I mean, it's not good because the pressing's horrible, but it's good that they want to buy Kind of Blue and they feel hip. But how do we turn that into, okay, well, you can't go hear Miles's Kind of Blue band, but you can go to Frankie's or Tula's or whatever club, that exists and hear like really great music. There's a huge disconnect between that. So, yeah. I mean, that's a large answer to your question. The scene has most definitely changed, but as I alluded to earlier, pre-COVID, there were places popping up all over the place, and you could come to Vancouver pretty much any night of the week and want to go hear some jazz, and you could hear it. Maybe like with the exception of like Monday night, you know. So it was really good. So yes, it has changed, but sometimes some years are really good, and then some years it's not. There's a big support network for it here. We're just trying to work on, we have the festival here that I have a bit of a fractured relationship, but we're working together to repair that. And, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. So it just ebbs and flows. It ebbs and flows. I don't think it's better or worse now than it was 10 years ago. It's just different. It's just different.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting, talking about album sales and the way that music is consumed. This is, if not my 20th year, almost my 20th year teaching at Tacoma School of the Arts, running their jazz program. And when it's interesting when I talk to my kids, I'm like, how many of you guys buy CDs? None of them even have CD players or record players, maybe a few. I mean, it's all either streamed and downloaded, and that's a whole nother box of worms. And we got into that. I mean, we'd be eating up this entire interview just talking about that.
We
sucks,
would,
but
what I can tell you about that is that the CD is not dead yet. And when you're talking to your kids, or when I'm talking to my kids, without question, dead. But in the grander scheme of things, because of the type of music we play, because it's sort of a niche genre, the CD still has a long life. A big part of my business is still very much physical, without question. Now, that is eventually going to go away, but it's not quite as quick as they're sort of letting on, unless you're Ed Sheeran and you're you're appealing to a 20-something crowd. Yes, then it's really insignificant. But for me personally, and for my label and what I'm doing, CD is still very viable.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. Well, so I want to go back to North Texas. So why did you choose North? I mean, obviously, jazz musicians know that North Texas has a great reputation as being a wonderful school for jazz. Why did you personally choose that school to attend as opposed to somewhere else? Yeah,
there were two reasons. One, it was a public institution, so it wasn't like Berkeley, which was like thousands of dollars, which I was never going to be able to afford. I actually almost went to Spokane Falls. Is that what
Eastern?
It was?
Oh, okay.
Gary Edighofer was the professor there. Anyways, but one of the main reasons, because Brad Turner had gone there, and so he was sort of, there was a contingent of about 7 or 8 CAP students that went there, kind of based on his recommendation. I never really had this. I wanted to see if I could go to a big school and make a dent, and it was sort of like am I good as I think I am? Because I never thought I was any good, but it was sort of a measuring stick for me. And so I did it. I got a scholarship and I went to North Texas and I did quite well there. I didn't particularly like the school itself was great. The teachers weren't any better than they are here. But I mean, the students, oh my God. I remember I pulled up with my friend. We pulled up to the practice room, and of course they've got like a whole room, like a whole building of practice rooms. And we got out of the car, and I was like this young, got my saxophone, and I just hear this guy practicing in his room, and it's just like the baddest saxophone I've ever heard in my life. And I called my dad almost in tears. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm going to get killed, you know? And I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I hung. But it was competitive, and I didn't like that. I'm like, first of all, I'm not going to win. And secondly, it's not really about winning. I don't want to win anything. So I managed to get with some people that I liked, and some of them left for the same reasons that I left. You know, I just didn't, the vibe wasn't right for me. I just didn't like that. And, you know, to this day, I don't like jam sessions for that same reason. You know, I'm just like, you know, that's not, and so I built my career. I'm very lucky. I built my career. I do gigs that I want to do. That's it. Yeah. That's all I do. And I'm very lucky that way. So that's why I chose that school. It was a great school. Texas was an interesting place, but I mean, we saw lots of music. I was away from home. You know, I just slept. I breathed music like just all day. I was a student. I was broke. It was just like practicing and hanging and drinking and playing and practicing, and staying up late and practicing more and playing. I mean, it was amazing. You know, when I look back at it now, I'm like, Jesus, I wish I could kind of go back there for a minute, because now I have no time to practice. I'm constantly frustrated, you know?
Yeah.
But having said that, my goal was never to move to New York and try to become like the next Chris Potter and turn the world on its ear. It was never that. Maybe for a brief time. I just loved the music, and I wanted to be close to the music. And I actually felt that I had the skill set to do more for the music than just, I don't know. I just wasn't sure that the world needed, not that I was going to be it, but I'm not sure the world needed another burning saxophone player, you know? It's like, what can I do? And I was interested in the business of music. I was interested in that side. I was interested in radio. I was interested in presenting. I was interested in recording. I was interested in all that stuff. So when I bought my club, which I ran for 14 years, I honestly and truly thought, okay, the saxophone is very quickly going to fade away into the background. Yeah, I'll sit in, and because it's my club, everybody will ask me, oh, Cory, you want to sit in? And that's exactly what happened. But in about 2003, 2004, it all kind of changed, and I realized, holy shit, like I've been listening to all this music, and I was practicing at the club because I was down there 24/7. Like, I'm actually a pretty good musician, and I could actually play a lot more. And the focus completely shifted, and my career was a little later than 2004. It's probably like 2006. My career kind of took off, you know? Yeah. And all these opportunities started coming my way. So like Charles McPherson would ask me to sit in, and Fathead Newman would ask me to sit in, and you know, then all of a sudden I find myself making a record with Mike Ladon and Joe Farnsworth and Peter Bernstein, and, you know, touring with Jim Rotundi and touring with Steve Davis and recording with Joey DeFrancesco. Like, it just kept kind of like, so it's like, okay, I guess I'm a musician whether I want it or not, I guess, you know, and that's come with some pressure for me, because I don't always feel like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes I'm kind of behind the eight ball, like where all the other guys were sitting there dedicating their lives like 100% to playing. Yeah. And here I am, you know, fumbling my way through, or feel like I'm fumbling my way through shit that I should have had together many years ago. So it's been a hard thing for me to kind of, I'm also extremely hard on myself, which doesn't help, but it's, you know, it's what it is. And I've made a nice career, and I get a lot of really nice gigs, and I just keep trying to improve and keep trying to just tell myself that I'm enough and how I play is enough. And just as long as I'm striving to be better, that's all that matters. And so, but it's, you know, it's been a struggle. It's straddling that line has always been a struggle, you know? Yeah. Well, and for people that don't know, I think most jazz musicians around this region know of your club, which is the Cellar, and then Cellar Live is the record label. Yeah, we rebranded it a few years ago as the Cellar Music Group. But yes, Cellar Live is. So yeah. So aside from running the Cellar Club for the 14 years, which is quite impressive as a jazz club, because not only it's not just like a, you know, there are some clubs that just kind of do like local things or small little things, but it was like the main jazz club of Vancouver, and you had national headliners and international headliners in this spot, you know.
So not only doing that, but then you also when did you start the record label? And
the record label started pretty much right from day one. I mean, we installed some recording gear. Actually, that happened about a year. But I was hiring engineers to come in and do some stuff more because I wanted to just document it. Because
right.
we're gonna go out of business so fast. I want to have some documentation of all of this. And then we started installing some permanent recording gear, and then it kind of just took off. And that's another thing. I never ever planned on having a record label with 225 titles. That's not what I had planned. Yeah. But the two worked so well together, it just kind of kept going, And I don't mind a little risk. I've always been willing to put my money where my mouth is and create. I made some dumb decisions, but most of the decisions I've made have been pretty good. And, all I know is that here I am, 20 years later, because we've been closed for 4 or 5 now. Actually, wow, 6, 7 almost. Here I am 21 years later without a corporate gig, to speak of. Like, I'm making it. So I guess, I guess those decisions were good ones. But so, yeah, and the label, especially over COVID, the label has kind of taken on a life of its own.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just pumping out content. I mean, a lot of the albums that you're putting out become award-winning and high rated on different jazz charts and working with well-established artists, which is a good thing, obviously.
Yeah, I feel very lucky, man. I sometimes I look, I have the you can't see it, but beside me I have all my titles, like all the Cellar Live titles lined up here, and I gotta look over there sometimes and I go, damn, I forgot about that one. So there's kind of a story in every one of those CDs in a way, and we're getting into the vinyl market now with the archival releases. I've been working with Zev Feldman, and that's been so fun. I mean, I'm like a little kid, I'll get an email and say, hey, I got some Sonny Stitt, can you check this out for me? And I'm like, oh my God, Sonny Stitt, we got to release it. I mean, it's insane, So people knew what I was doing down here while my kids were at school and my wife was at work. It's like jazz Disneyland down here.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Sonny Stitt because I wanted to take the conversation that direction and kind of saxophone nerd out here because I know that you and I have a mutual affection for Sonny Stitt. And the reason I know this, not just because of posts that you've made, and I also want to, if we have time, and I think this might take the rest of the interview, so I'm going to try and not go that route, but also discuss some Hank Mobley with you. But I thought it was interesting, just the stars aligned just right. And I happened to be in Vancouver and it happened to be on a night that you were playing. And I got in touch and said, hey, do you mind if I come down and hang out? Yeah. And you graciously invited me to sit in. And I was impressed because you had a book and you had a chart that someone had written down. And I'm assuming it was you. It was a Sonny Stitt song, Sonny's Tune. And you had the whole arrangement written down. I'm like, okay, only a Sonny Stitt fan would have taken the time to get that chart together and play it. So I was very impressed. So as a saxophonist with a huge affinity for Sonny Stitt, I want to ask you, talk to me a little bit about Sonny Stitt and his influence on your saxophone playing.
Yeah, I know it's funny. It's really funny you say that. And the other something else funny happened in regards to that too, just the other day. So not to dispute what you said, because he has had an influence on my playing, but Sonny Stitt is not the first guy that I kind of gravitate. I mean, I'm a Hank guy. Like I am a Hank guy. But Sonny, there's just something. First of all, what I love about Sonny, and I've been listening to about 6 hours of him nonstop. Even though his technical prowess is kind of inhuman, there's a lot of human elements in his playing that make me go, oh, it's okay. Like, for example, oh, it's okay that I repeat that lick 5 times in one solo because Sonny Stitt does it. Now, I can't play the shit that he's playing in between the repetition of those licks, but there's a human element to his playing, and his playing is very easy to understand. It's very what's the word? It's very logical. Everything he plays is very logical. Whereas you take somebody like Hank, who's not quite as technical, and it's not that it's not logical, but Sonny Stitt was a bebopper, whereas I kind of gravitate more towards the hard bop, kind of vibe than I do bebop. But Sonny Stitt's sound, his phrasing, even though they were probably close to the same age, although now I'm saying that I'm probably wrong. Like there's something about, like, obviously Bird, but there's something a little more relatable, at least for me, to listen to Sonny Stitt. You know, he also lived much longer than Bird, which kind of helped, you know.
Yeah.
But just the technical prowess, the blues in his playing, you know, the continuation of lines, and just the logical, the logic behind every note that he plays. So that's something to me. And I was doing a studio session. I was finishing off I did a strings record, which was really fun, but it was also very stressful. But anyways, I went in and redid all my parts because I could now play with the whole string orchestra. And anyways, I had a really good friend of mine come and produce for me, because I need to have somebody there. He's a saxophone player. He's a really good friend. I said, I want you to just tell me yes or tell me no, and be tough on me. Tell him. So anyways, it was great. But what he said was, he's like, have you been listening to Sonny Stitt by any chance? I'm like, oh my God, I've been listening to him like for 4 days straight, dumping these reel to reels down. So it's like, wow, you know, and I wasn't practicing Sonny Stitt. I just, you know, I had sitting like right here, like where I am with you, just with Sonny Stitt playing. And so, I'm going to spend more time with him for sure, because, you know, of that. And, but it's interesting that you picked that up. And actually, the funny thing I remember with that night is because you got there later. Yeah. I think there were actually 3 Sonny Stitt tunes in the book that particular night. So,
yeah. You know. Oh, I got there as soon as I was coming from another gig. We were playing at the Harmony Arts Festival. And I had to drive there, and then I had to find parking, and then, you know, this whole, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Sonny, man. I mean, you know.
Well, okay, so now, again, I want to get over – let's talk about Hank Mobley. So talk a little bit about Hank Mobley. I mean, you already have, but let's get in here a little bit.
Yeah, there's – you know, I mean, if I'm going to talk about Hank, I need to talk about – I kind of alluded to it. I need to talk about the, you know, the hard bop thing. Because to me, that's like – that's everything that I want in music. It has the complexity of bebop, but the backbone or backbeat and the funkiness, if you will, and the bluesiness that sometimes, I mean, of course bebop had blues, but you know what I mean, like the backbeat, the blues, the crowd pleasing, the joy. I mean, I think bebop is joyous. My wife doesn't think bebop is joyous, but she thinks Hank Mobley, Roll Call, and Soul Station are joyous. You know, so that, I mean, just to put it in layman's terms, so that first and foremost, that's that. And who do you think about when you think about that? I think Art Blakey. Yeah. So I didn't come to Hank and then the rest of it. I came to Hard Bop and then, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And then I heard Hank and Lee. I was like, okay, I'm done. You know, and I'll fight with somebody all day long about, I'll take Hank and Lee over Hank and Wayne any day. No disrespect to Wayne. There's something about the way Hank and Lee blended, and I was doing a lot of gigs with trumpet players. Like I was playing a lot with Jim Rotundi at that time, and I was really starting to get into Hank. And just the way, depending on what recording you listen to, and if there's any saxophone players listening, they'll probably be appalled when I say this, but sometimes the way Hank plays, it almost sounds like he's going to fall apart. Like it kind of is on the edge of like, but he never does, like ever. You know, and it's like, oh no, that you're not almost falling apart. So it's almost this it's there's nothing perfect about what he plays, and that makes it perfect. Whereas Sonny Stitt, like everything Sonny Stitt played was perfect. You know, you talk about trumpet players, Clifford Brown, perfection. Lee Morgan, a little greasier. It's a little greasy. So that the sound, how he blended with Lee, and the tunes that they were playing with Hank. And I didn't realize this till much later, like that he wrote all those tunes, like Hip Sippy Blues and Just Coolin', and he was so hip, you know. Yeah. And, you know, this sounds completely outrageous, but look at the record covers. I mean, man, I remember the first time I saw Soul Station, the cover, I didn't care who it was. I was like, the look of this record is like, it exemplifies everything that I want to be and that jazz is. And then you put the record on and Hank plays Remember. And it's just like, okay, so, and he likes he uses these devices in his composing. And so you see a lot of them, like I played all the Hank tunes and, a lot of the same devices. So again, it's kind of that human element. I'm like, oh, you can write 3 tunes that are kind of the same, and record them all. And it, just the way he phrases and his sound and yeah, for lack of a better description, that sometimes that sound that it's on the verge of falling apart.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, particularly with the compositions too, because if you look at someone like Sonny Stitt, he didn't really write a lot of, he was always recording standards. Maybe he would write a rhythm change his head or a blues melody, but beyond that, he was always recording standards. Whereas Hank did a lot more composing, and maybe that, those elements kind of come out. His compositional thinking comes out in his solos as well. Clearly.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, I like all of those guys from that. Kind of like I'm thinking alto now, like Sonny Red, who's doing a lot of like that hard bop kind of stuff. I really come from the I love the blues. So, I love Stanley Turrentine. I love how Stanley Turrentine can play a really difficult tune, yet it sounds like a blues. How many times I've like transcribed a tune or something that he's played on, or Hank for that matter, like transcribed a tune. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this tune. This is easy. And it's like, you get the tune and you're like, what? This is not like it sounds like a blues, it's like, this is quite difficult to play,
Yeah.
Sonny, of course, Sonny from that time when he was kind of doing some of the hard bop kind of stuff. So that's really where I live. Like I try to live there like on a permanent basis,
Yeah.
And I've been, I've also been into, not to get back to Stitt, but there's a great saxophone player in New York named Nick Hempton. He's originally from Australia, and he's like a Stitt freak. And pre-COVID, he was up a couple of times. And I'm like, man, I got to do what you're doing. It's like, it's all Stitt, man, all Sonny Stitt. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're kind of getting to that time here. If we have any, if you have any questions, now's the time. I'm keeping an eye here to see if anybody has any. So let us know. And if not, we're just going to keep talking music stuff here. So in the meantime, no questions are coming yet, but Cory, can you talk a little bit? I know you've run these projects where you will, and I'm assuming at some point you'll resume them, where you'll get a group together and go to New York and kind of tour New York and the music scene. And can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, my son came down yesterday. He said, oh, Daddy, we would normally be leaving to New York right now. And every spring break for essentially the last 10 years, we've gone with a group of people to New York. It started out, I did a tour to Cuba, and I was a celebrity host, which is hilarious. But in any event, everybody was saying, everybody that I met on it, you should go to New York, you should go to New York. So I did it again one year, never with the intention of, I just want a free trip to New York, and we did it. It was a massive success. So I did it the next year, sold out. Next year, sold out. So it sells out every year. We just go to New York and we do all these, we tour around the city and drink wine and eat good food and listen to jazz. And, I know all the club owners there. So we hook up private exclusive sessions. We've recorded probably 10 or 11 records for the label like that. So I try to give them a really unique experience. And it's funny, a couple of years ago I had somebody call me up who was just pissy and say, well, I looked at your tour and it's it's like looks like I can go there and do it cheaper. I'm like, well, you probably could. I said, have you ever been to New York before? He said, no. And I said, well, look, let me tell you something about going to New York. Everybody falls into, there's one pitfall you're going to fall into, whether it's getting screwed by a cab driver, or something. You come with me, we're going to do it right. And if you're making your judgment based on seeing 3 events on the tour, which were just regular clubs, but, I didn't mention that we have a private recording session with George Coleman and Emmett Cohen. Private recording session with David Hazeltine, we're getting this, we're getting that, so it's a really kind of exclusive and really fun thing. And it's been a huge part of my income, and it's been a huge part of my relationship building process with my New York friends and club owners and presenters there. So it's been great. I mean, we did I don't know if you know about this, but we did a 2 years ago, we did like a live recording session at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. Like that's never been done before, and I worked my ass off trying to make that happen. And since then I've gone back and recorded 6 albums in that studio. There have been like 6 of the greatest times of my life just being in that studio. So, it's been a real relationship builder for me, and something that I'm, looking forward to getting back to once this stuff ends, for sure.
Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to know more about that, they can certainly can want to know about you. Find this stuff on your website, I'm assuming, correct?
Yep. Yeah. CoryWeeds.com.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a question for you, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus here, but you presented so many wonderful artists, over the years. I'm curious as to who have been some of your favorites to present, and why.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. George Coleman, both times he came here, was huge for me. I mean, he's like, I'm honored to call him my friend. We talk. It was just his 86th birthday. I called him up, and it's always a short talk, but I always feel so, I don't know, I always feel so inspired, when I talk to him. And so those two shows that he came up and did were special to me. Christian McBride was amazing. Just a great man, a great person, a great ambassador, and there's no hype there. Like, that guy is one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life, and what he does to an audience and how he handles an audience. I mean, it was incredible to have him 4 days at a 70-seat jazz club. It was a real coup. That was really fun. Having Joey D here was amazing. Of course, the many times I brought Harold Mayburn was always a blast. Always special having Mike Ladon and Peter Bernstein and Joe Farnsworth, like those kind of my core guys. David Fathead Newman was fun. Mulgrew Miller did an incredible trio. I'll never forget, because I had to lowball his agent because it was the middle of the summer, and I could, we were early on in the club's existence, and so I lowballed them and they took it. I was like, oh my God. So Mulgrew and his trio came up and just like tore the roof off the place. So many. McKenny Barron came. That was recorded for CBC, so that was awesome. Dr. Lonnie Smith. I mean, there's so many. It's hard to really pick a favorite, but having George Coleman on that stage was twice was pretty significant for me, for sure. Lewis Hayes and the Cannonball Band, that was another big one. Lewis Nash and his quintet, we made a record there. So I mean, it goes on and on. Right. I think I know what your next question might be, but
no, I was just curious. I was okay. Worse. Let's go worse.
Yeah. Well, I brought Kenny Garrett, and that was not cool. He's one of the only he was my hero. I mean, at that time, and he was the only guy that came to the club, that I can honestly say came to the club and didn't get it. Didn't get me, didn't get the club, didn't get that I was a saxophone player, didn't get that this was like a grassroots. I think he was offended maybe that he was playing such a tiny jazz club, but he just wasn't cool. And I told his agent, his agent called, said Kenny's going to be in the area again, and sent him a note and said, here's all the reasons I'll never book him again. Yeah. And that was the end of it. His band was odd. It was not a good experience. That one left a very sour taste in my mouth. In his defense, I had him on a pedestal that probably nobody could have really reached, but all you had to do was just come and play. It was weird. Out of all the people, everybody doesn't have to come to the club. Even now at Frankie's that I book here in Vancouver, I don't need you to be my best friend. Some people have come and some people have gone, and that was the end of it. They're pleasant, they played their music, and that was it. Some people come and we become friends, like Jeremy Pelt and I became good friends, and George Coleman and Eric Alexander and all those guys. But I kind of ask you to just sort of understand what's going on here, understand a little bit who I am and what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And Kenny just didn't get it, and that's fine. I mean, I've moved on, and that's the end of it. I hear that I'm not the only guy that's had that issue. So, and I'm not afraid to say it. I'm not saying anything bad. The guy's one of the baddest saxophone players ever, but he was a dick when he was in Vancouver. So, that's the end of it. Whatever. So yeah. Well, I'm curious. Let me see if any other questions are coming. 1 second. So far, so good. Well,
Well, so having a unique experience of both being a performer who books and produces things, but also a club owner. That's a unique insight that a lot of people don't have. I think many musicians just see things from the perspective of I'm a musician trying to perform and book gigs places. So what are some things, maybe in your opinion of having all those years and experience doing that, what are some things that you think musicians should know when they're trying to book things that you as a club owner look for and pay attention to?
Yeah, I did a bit of a rant on this a couple of weeks ago on Instagram. I mean, let me be really frank. First of all, don't address me as bro when you've never met me. Like in an email, hey bro, I play guitar and I'd like a gig. No, I'm not your. First of all, I'm not your bro. Secondly, like who, and this is and I'm not trying to throw all young people under the bus because I deal with some young people who are extremely professional and awesome, but this is a young generational problem, man. That it's not cool. I don't even think you would do that. I don't even think, and you and I know each other. You're not going to say, yo, Weeds, I'm coming up, give me a gig.
Yeah.
You'll say, hey man, so there's that, but do your research. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get the email. Yeah. Hey, we're a progressive rock band and we're going to be in town on Monday night, wondering if we can get a gig. First of all, like if you took 3 seconds to do your research, you realize we're a friggin' jazz club. Secondly, you realize we're not open Monday night. So if you do your research and frame your email as such, like, hey, I see that you're not open on Monday nights, but I have a group that's in town. We're a jazz group. We have a day off. We have some family in town, and I think we could probably get a pretty good crowd. I know it's a Monday night and it's a tough night, but would you be into talking? Yes, absolutely. I'd be into talking. So just mind your approach and remember that we're very busy. We don't have a lot of time. Don't call. This is another thing. Like, don't attach 7 MP3s to your email that basically shuts down my computer. Like this kind of stuff. And this is coming from a very professional place. I don't need to know your life story unless your life story really is a focus of your music. I remember getting an email. The gig never happened, and I wish I could remember who it was. I think he had autism. And this was a very important piece, obviously, about his music. That's different.
Yeah.
But, I don't need to hear, I started clarinet when I was in grade 6, and then I switched to alto, and then I quit music. I don't need any of that. Like, I need to know it. Things move very fast these days. And I think as I'm saying that, my young person statement, I'm a little bit contradictory because they're trying to move fast because we live in a fast world. But you don't address me as bro. You don't address me as your friend. Like, I've never met you. And then the other thing, this is harder when you're out of town, but I can't stand people that, and you presented too, so I'm sure Kareem's presenting now, so I better email him for a gig. Like, did you go to Kareem's gig? Have you gone down to the club and hung out and had a beer and met some musicians? And when you did you just come down and say, oh, hey, I'm Cory, I'm so-and-so, can I get a gig? Like, just hang out. I use this friend of mine, Jesse Cahill, a great drummer who I've done hundreds of gigs with. Man, he did it so perfectly. He would come down to the Cellar. Second set was free for musicians. He'd come down, shake a few hands. He introduced himself. I'm Jesse. I'm from Victoria. I'm a drummer. Oh, nice to meet you. And then after 3 or 4 times, he started talking about a gig. I'm like, yeah, that's the way you do it. It's not rocket science, but this whole yo, bro kind of thing. I mean, man, and now when I get those emails, I take it as an opportunity to educate. I'm like, you haven't offended me because I really don't care. Like, I really don't care. You need to know this because the next guy isn't going to afford you. The next guy's not going to give you the privilege of sending back an email like, I'm going to send you back. You need to change your shit because that's not okay to go out like that in the world. So, those things there are the big ones, and people that, and, do some research. Like, when you go to Frankie's Jazz Club here in Vancouver, like you can see what's going on there. Like, okay, local headliners, international headliners, like a Saturday night gig probably is not going to happen. So I just ask people, just do a little bit of research, and I'm sure I've made the mistake too. There's somebody probably out there on the internet goes, oh, I remember you did this to the, I don't, but You know, there's some basic professional courtesies that you should act with, in my opinion.
A certain level of decorum when you're addressing someone who you don't know.
Yes. Yeah, it's common sense, you would think, but you'd be shocked, man. I wish I kept some of the emails that I get.
Maybe we'll start compiling a list. Don't name names, but just like you can put the letters up.
The email, take the Here's not how to do it.
Make like a Cory's top 10 for each year, right? Just collect.
And you have to be careful because the younger generation is easily offendable too, right? The other things, and somebody taught me this, and this is something that I think about a lot. I think I'm really approachable, but a young 17-year-old may completely be intimidated by me. I've never thought, I'm like, me? Why would anybody be intimidated of me? But I forget sometimes that like I'm like a guy in Vancouver who books a lot of stuff and my name is out there. And so I think like I'm the easiest guy to get to know at all. And so I do try to remember that. However, that's no excuse for not using a certain decorum, as you say, when addressing somebody in a professional way. So, it's I got to remember that stuff too,
Yeah. One of our viewers who's a student of mine wrote, "Thanks, bro."
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I like it. That sense of humor, that's okay.
Right on. Well, we're close to the end here. Let me check one more time just to make sure we're not leaving. And sometimes questions will come in after the fact, and if they do, I'll let you know so we can address them.
Of course, absolutely.
So I think a couple minutes left here. In terms of, because I know you've presented a bunch of young artists as well. Who are some of the younger artists that you've presented that you've been, kind of really like, oh, these guys are going to be, fantastic? If they're already fantastic, but I mean, have you come across any young artists that you've been quite impressed with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he's still young, but now he's on a trajectory. But I mean, I started dealing with Emmett Cohen about 4 years ago, and you can see what's happened there.
Yeah.
Not to toot my own horn, pardon the pun, but we have a record coming out it's actually not coming out till September, but we're releasing a bunch of singles. He's a young singer, saxophonist from New York named Michael Stephenson. He's also got a alter ego called Sunny Step, which is like an R&B kind of artist. But this kid is young and he sings his ass off and he plays his ass off, and he's really going to try to do some stuff with him and try to bring his career to the next level. His pianist is Julian Rodriguez. Julius Rodriguez is an incredible pianist who I don't even know if it's common knowledge, but I think he signed with Verve. I haven't had the chance to present him live because COVID, but I presented a live stream with Isaiah J. Thompson, who is a pianist also from New York that is just incredible. So there's no shortage of great young musicians out there. Locally, I'm trying to think. I'm kind of drawing a blank. There's some great young musicians here, but those are the ones that come to mind, like right off the top of my head, that we're going to be hearing some big things from in the very near future.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Cory, thank you so much for your time. We're drawing close to the end here, but it's been a pleasure having you as our guest. I hope everything weathers the storm just fine up there. It seems like we're starting to come around and things are opening up a little bit with things. So, but I wish you all the best, and I'll still watching all the stuff. So, if other people watching, if you haven't, like I said, check out Cory's stuff on Instagram and also his Facebook stuff. He's always got interesting stuff to say and cool things happening. So
I appreciate you doing it, man. It's fun to talk about this kind of stuff.
For sure.
Musician to musician, it's fun.
Totally. There's a great book that I always tell people about by drummer Art Taylor, which is I think Notes and Tones, where it's just him interviewing musicians. And it's kind of cool because a lot of times when you see these musician interviews, they're kind of just like, not really taking it seriously. But when he's going through and interviewing these other artists like Miles Davis or Art Blakey or Dexter Gordon or Freddie Hubbard, I mean, it's very interesting to see how candid and these other perspectives and things that they get into. So
have you heard about this one?
No.
That's Jeremy Pelt's new book. And it's called Examining the Lives of Jazz's Great Storytellers. And it's Jeremy Pelt did it. And it's based on the Notes and Tones. Notes and Tones concept. It's phenomenal. It's a really great read. Yeah, it's it's really good. It's called Griot. You can get it from Pelt's website. It's great. It's a really good book.
Right on. One more question that I forgot to ask. As the musician who you are now, 2021, what are some things, and we've kind of gone through a lot of this already, but what are some things that you found to be super, super helpful in your growth as a musician and to who you've become today, that if you would impart that knowledge onto someone else that's going to consider becoming a musician, what would those things be?
Learn your melodic minor scale. I mean, listening, you see it a lot in young people too, like listening, you owe yourself. You don't have to go back to, let's talk saxophone. You don't have to go back to Johnny. You don't have to stay at Johnny Hodges, but you need to go back and check it out. For guitar players, like jazz doesn't start with Kurt Rosenwinkel and Ben Monder. You got to go further back. Piano players, it doesn't start with Robert Glasper. Again, you don't have to aspire to want to play like Bud Powell or Gene Harris or Tommy Flanagan, but you need to go back there. So, do yourself a solid and make sure that you get as much music knowledge as you can. Go back and listen to as much stuff as you can. And from an individual point, just playing, for me, more than anything, just playing with people and just playing music as much as you possibly can. I mean, there's all of course, transcribing and learning licks in 12 keys. But lately, my big thing lately has been, man, I wish I spent more time with a melodic minor scale when I had the time. That's like the key to jazz, It's like everything. I've been practicing a lot over COVID, and I'm like, everything I'm like, wait a minute. That's melodic minor. Wait a minute. That's melodic minor. I'm like, who knew?
Right on. Well, thank you so much for your time, Cory. Wish you guys all the best up there.
Okay,
and we'll see you hopefully sooner than later.
Stay safe.
You too. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Bye.